All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this Thrive Today webinar on Can I Experience Joy When I Don't Feel Happy? My name is Christy Harang. I'll be your host for our time together. And on behalf of the entire Thrive Today team, we are so glad that you can be with us for this time. So here at Thrive Today, we teach and train on 19 relational skills that help us to have healthy and thriving relationships. And we are in the middle of a series called the Foundational 5. And this series is taking a look at our 5 most foundational relational skills that all of the other skills build upon. And for each of these skills, we're doing a free webinar to introduce you to what the skill is and why we need it. And we're following it up with an online event where we do more teaching on the theory behind the skill, sprinkled with a little bit of practice. And then we're also releasing an online course where we dive deeper into training on practices and exercises that help us to actually develop this skill so we become more proficient in it. So last month we talked about skill 0, which is how to get our relational brain turned on. We had a joy switch webinar and event. And this month we're talking about skill 1, which is building joy. So we'll be talking more about what joy is and why we need it and how we can develop it. So we are blessed to be joined for this discussion with Chris Coursey, who is our president and co-founder and an author of several books, including The Joy Switch, which he just released. And he has over 20 years of experience in developing these relational skills and also putting them into practice in work, with family, and different relationships. So he's a huge wealth of knowledge for us. So Chris, thank you for being with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Christy. I'm just delighted to be here. I can't wait for our time together. And I just welcome all of our friends who are with us today.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you all with us. So we have a great conversation in store. But first, I want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. And so if you registered on Zoom, you'll receive a recording tomorrow. If you happen to be watching on Facebook Live and you want to officially register and receive the recording, you can go to thrivetoday.org/webinars/ and you can register. We're going to have a Q&A time at the end. We'll get to a few questions that you all might have. So as you're watching, if you're on Zoom, you can put questions into the Q&A button feature, and we will answer whatever we can get to. If you're on Facebook, we're not going to be able to answer your questions live, but you can put them in the comments, and we'll go back and answer as many as we can. All right, so Chris, we're talking about joy today, and I was just thinking about this, that there's a lot of different takes out there on what joy is. And I was thinking, if I was in a room of 10 people, we were all asked, what is joy? We might have some very different answers. So can you talk to us a little bit about defining our terms from brain science and the Bible? What actually is joy? And is it the same thing as happiness?
That is the million-dollar question. So there's a number of books out there that talk about joy. Some books equate it with happiness. Some books say it's just something we can choose anytime we want. What all this means is there's a lot of confusion. So I'd like to go back to, as you said, 2 things. Let's look at what brain science has to say, then let's look a little bit about what joy is in the Bible. So from brain science perspective, that basically means when you walk into a room and somebody's face lights up to see you, you see it on their face, especially around their eyes, their mouth. You will hear it in their voice. You see their body language, their gestures, their movements. What happens is your brain responds with joy. So you see joy, you feel it. Basically, you feel like you're the sparkle in someone else's eyes. And so when you are that sparkle, someone lights up because it's you, only you, that response is joy. So I am glad to see you. It's very authentic. It's genuine. As I often tell people, it's more like a reflex. So it's not a decision of the will. It is actually more like a reflex. So it is something that we experience relationally. And so it's genuine. And the part of your brain that actually does joy is nonverbal. So think about that for a moment. the part of your brain which is in the frontal lobe, right behind basically your right eye. That part of the brain is all nonverbal, and it actually grows throughout your lifespan. And with what's known as brain plasticity, which just means I can, grow and learn new things later in life, my brain's able to change basically according to like experience. So the cool thing about joy, friends, is whenever you see that face that lights up, you hear that voice, you see that body respond, and eventually the words as well. That is very much literally changing your brain. And so for infants do this really well. It's usually after about 2 to 3 months of life, because all the mechanisms in the brain are basically ready to start building joy. Infants will light up when they see mommy or daddy's face, or grandma or grandpa's face. Someone's face lights up to see them. They light up, and you see it in their body language. Like it's joy's high energy. So you'll see them like wave their arms, kick their feet. You'll see their face brighten up. And for babies, joy's euphoric. So joy is like, we feel so fully alive with joy. Like, so for a baby, it is like, I'm on cloud 9 here because my people are glad to see me. And so babies learn there must be something good here, because look how excited you are when you look at me. And of course, as Christians, this is very, very cool, because we have a God who is glad to see us. So we're the sparkle in God's eyes. And so we see in scripture, there's a lot of references to joy. And what you see in the Bible is joy is a relationship. So I like to call it, it's almost like a relational transaction, kind of like that parent who lights up to see baby lights up, and then parent sees it, parent feels more joy. So it's this little dance. So in the Bible, joy is this relationship. So we think about the joy of the Lord, right? Or we think about Jesus for the joy set before him. Now, if joy means happiness, then this really doesn't make any sense, because for the joy set before him. So in other words, because of you, because joy is a relationship, because of you, Jesus endured the cross. So we see that joy as a relationship. Even Jesus in John 15:11, I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be full or complete. So it's this relational transaction. A lot of people might not think about this, but I love to also see how we find Jesus in the Old Testament. Even like how the tabernacle, had bread. We call it the bread of the presence. It's the showbread. Even the showbread in how the tabernacle was set up. That bread means it's the the bread of the faces. So what that means is this was also kind of a reflection, a reminder of like God's presence, God's face. So in the Bible, if you have God's face, you have God's presence. And we see Aaron's blessing with God's face over Israel. It's all about God's face, God's countenance. And so it's very interesting to even see how joy is really connected with also God's presence, God's face, and how he delights in his people, and just the reminders that he gives us in the Bible. So the concept of joy is it's kind of like the glue that brings us together, Christy. It's kind of how I like to look at it. So it's euphoric, it's genuine, it's transparent, and it's just, it's a relationship. So we are glad to be together. And we won't spend a lot of time on it today, because this will be our next skill next month, but joy should always lead to rest. So you can only sustain joy for so long before you just need the time out and the rest. And so joy is high energy. We're glad to be together. It's genuine, it's authentic. But then you know what you need, as what baby will do, we'll look away for a few moments and catch our breath. You just have a breather. Then we look back and we're ready for more of that glad to be together joy. So the ideal picture here, friends, is that our joy relationally with people in our lives should also be kind of a picture of God's joy and God's delight. So we need what I tell people, we need Jesus joy, but we also need people joy. So we actually kind of need both. So Jesus in a sense that you can see it as Jesus wants us to share his joy relationally. And so we see people, we light up to see them. We're glad to be together. My friend Marcus Warner would call it relational happiness. So it's relational, we're glad to be together. And you can just think of people in your lives who light up to see you, or people who are just genuinely glad to see you. And even just thinking about that can really spark some joy.
So, Chris, as we talk about this as a skill, would you say, I'll throw this out there, you can kind of correct me or alter it, but that the skill is actually us having the ability to be in joy, to experience being the sparkle in someone's eye, as well as being able to enjoy others?
Yes, that's exactly right. So what's neat about joy, you look at how the brain is like developing over the lifetime. For children, that joy of a parent becomes internalized. So when baby sees mommy or daddy's faces light up, so baby's receiving joy, right? You light up to see me. Eventually that image of like mommy's face is internalized in baby's brain. So whenever mommy's not around, baby just has to think about that joyful face, and you get the same kind of similar reaction as though you were doing it live with mommy. So in a sense, as we receive it, then over time we can actually start to give it. And so that's what's neat about relational skills, friends. When you're building joy as a particular skill, a specific skill, you will use this skill throughout your life. You will use it without thinking about it. It'll be more like a reflex, like a habit. And again, it's genuine. I can't fake it till I make it. That just doesn't work well when it comes to like the relational brain. It's genuine. So it's just whatever is there is what will be conveyed. And so I like to encourage people, like, with a little bit of practice, you can learn this habit. And joy is something you experience live, which changes your brain, changes your life, changes your relationships. But even just remembering it, just like that baby with mommy's internal, that face that's internalized, even remembering joy, your body goes through a series of reactions where you have the feel-good chemicals that are being released just as you remember it, you think about it. And of course, if you tell the story of it, then you're going to get more bang for your buck, because then the joy is starting to really go other places. But genuine joy is that like a reflex. So it happens so fast, Christy. Like we don't think about it, because thinking is actually a slower process for the relational brain. So it's like that reflex. You just see your friend that you haven't seen in a while, or you're with the family member you haven't seen in a while. You see them in the coffee shop, you spot them out, they turn around, you lock eyes, your faces light up. So it's a very fast process. Basically, my joy center talks to your joy center, and they just go back and forth 6 times a second. So that's just super speed, like sonic speed as far as your brain's concerned. And I can only track things that happen at 5 cycles per second. So 6 cycles per second is so much faster than conscious thought. So that's why I like to call it a reflex. It is just something that you will do without having to think about it. Now, here's good news. If you haven't had a lot of joy, or just wasn't a lot of joy growing up, you're not locked into that. You're not locked into that destiny. Like, the good news is here, the way that God created our brains to work, that we can learn this skill even later in life. And basically you can train your brain to run on the fuel of joy. Christy, that's good news. I mean, that is good news for this world, that we can all learn to run on the fuel of joy.
Now, speaking of fuel of joy, you're kind of entering into my next question was, so building joy is one of our foundational 5 relational skills, and it is essential. But can you tell us, why is it so essential? Why is this something we really need to develop in our lives?
Yeah, so joy gives us resilience. So we often think of like it's more common in culture to have like emotional intelligence. Like if you have emotional intelligence, like that's a really good thing to have. Or another kind of a newer term is relational intelligence. Just means that you're really good at relationships. And so what joy does is joy gives us the strength to bounce back when things go wrong. So I recover when things go wrong. I can learn to stay my relational self during hardship. So this was very fascinating for me as a pastoral counselor. So working with people who are working through the severe trauma and abuse, joy really set the stage for how well even the recovery process would go for people. So just like we need to be able to process pain, right? Bad things that happen, we need to work through that. But what joy does is it gives us the strength and the capacity to be able to do that. So from a recovery perspective, joy is crucial. From a developmental perspective, joy is what's part of building secure attachment. So joy is really what's going to help me be the person that God designed me to be. Joy will be part of that equation. So joy helps us reach our potential. Joy helps me to have strength to recover when things go wrong. And you know what's cool about joy is it changes our character. So it impacts our identity, who God made us to be, but it also changes our character. So you might know me as someone who maybe is anxious or depressed or angry, maybe I'm mad all the time. That's because my brain is just running on running at whatever speed that it's learned from basically a lot of what I've learned in my relationships. So if I'm mad all the time and I don't like that, I just wish, I had more peace and joy in my life. The good news is you actually start training your brain to run on joy, then you become a more joyful person. And you actually, with joy comes peace. So you have more peace in your life. You're able to think about the good stuff. So if it's been a bad day, what joy will do is it'll train your brain on a bad day to still find good things that you could enjoy. So even though I've had a lot of things maybe that are going wrong today, if my brain has learned to run on joy, even in the hard stuff, I will find things that I can enjoy and appreciate and savor. And that's what's cool about joy, is we internalize it. It becomes kind of foundational to our character and our interactions. And so when we interact with people, there's a very genuine joy. And let's face it, we like to be around people who are glad to be with us, right? Like, to imagine if every time you interact with me that I'm mad at you, you're probably not going to look forward to interacting with me if I'm always angry with you, or maybe disgusted or ashamed or whatever it is. Just substitute an emotion, anything but joy, we're not going to be excited about. So in the Bible, obviously joy is the youngest emotion recorded in scripture, because it was John the Baptist in Elizabeth's belly who jumped for joy at the sound of Mary's voice. So that's how powerful joy is. Like it is with us when we're little, and the fun just keeps going. If you think about heaven, what's exciting about heaven? Well, there's joy there. There's Jesus joy. We're going to be with God, but we're also going to be with people that we love. There's going to be this glad to be together joy. So this is good news for all of us, no matter where we're at. For most of us, we're probably feeling just a little bit on the crispy side from how hard it's been this past year with coronavirus and just the stress around the elections and the turmoil. For people, joy is what really helps us bounce back. It helps us to be our relational selves. And it's a good reflection of who Jesus made us to be.
As you're talking, it feels very empowering to know that I'm not, if I go through something hard, like you said, I'm not going to, my ability to bounce back from it. I actually have, if I develop the skill of joy, I'm going to be able to bounce back better. I'm going to have more resilience. And just that alone, and what you shared, feels very empowering, very encouraging and inspiring. So as we have a lot of people watching that might be new, or maybe they're explaining these things to friends. what would be some signs? Like, because I think back in my life, there have been some seasons where I had very little joy going on. The joy levels were super low, and this was a very, very underdeveloped skill. So, what would be some signs that someone's operating on pretty low joy levels?
That is a great question. And I'm sure that all of us can probably relate to those times where our joy batteries were low. What happens when the joy levels are just not what they could be or should be is pain and problems become very loud. And so your brain is like an amplifier. So it's either going to make the good stuff grow better or it's going to make the bad stuff louder. So when joy is just not high enough in my life, then I'm going to have a very low ability to handle the hard stuff. So a little bit of wind will knock me over, right? I'm just not able to relationally stay on my feet very well. If we're not cultivating joy, then something else will grow in the garden. Usually it's weeds of fear, right? Or so maybe fear is louder. I'm anxious, or I don't have a lot of hope. So I just feel pretty hopeless about the future, or sad. I'm just kind of stuck. So what joy does is it really does strengthen us. And so it gives us the ability to suffer well, we might say. That's a term my friend Jim Wilder uses. So joy gives us strength to suffer well so that I can still be myself no matter what's going on. So joy gives us kind of that strength to be ourselves. And it helps us be able to recover when things go wrong. Because if I don't recover when things go wrong, then that further zaps my battery and I have less capacity going forward. So I always encourage my friends who are particularly, say, in the recovery process to some degree, like focus on joy and just focus on growing your relational emotional capacity, because that will also give you strength to deal with the hard stuff. So in an ideal world, Christy, we would all, be born in joyful families where joy levels are high. But in the world that we live in, that doesn't always happen. So I want to give the good news here, which is that no matter what my life has been like or what I'm coming out of, the good news is starting joy today will neurologically changes my brain, which changes my character, my identity, which changes my relationship. So joy is really the kind of game changer. It's one of those things I want every person to know, every church to know, every family, every school, every workplace. Like joy is what makes people be the best version of themselves. So while fear might get short-term results, it's not good at all, really short-term or long-term. Joy is what helps people be fully alive, reflecting Christ's character and really being a good version of themselves. So joy is a big one, friends. I mean, it's just one of those that's, it's big, it's important, but it's something all of us can start today.
Yeah, and I love how encouraging that is, because I think about times when I had really low joy, and I think it was easy to feel like something's wrong with me. I don't have enough faith. And then to understand that, no, I just didn't have the skill developed in me. I mean, number one, it helps me not beat myself up because, oh, you just need to be stronger. You need to have more faith. You need to hold it together more and be brave and courageous. It's like, yes, we want to be brave and courageous. We want to have faith. But if we don't have this skill developed, we can't just like force ourselves to
Right.
be there. But then there's all this hope that there is something I can do. I can develop the skill of joy, and then it's going to naturally start to flow out of me. The more stability, the ability to rejoice in all circumstances. And so I love this. It's very
Yeah.
encouraging. So
Good.
let's talk about that. We're going to wrap up. This is my last question, and then we'll get to some of the questions that people are putting in. But give us one or two just bite-sized steps of something we can do today to start developing joy.
Yeah, so this is exciting because there's really a lot that we can do. What's cool about how God designed the brain is that when you remember the good stuff, So I might remember the joyful interaction with my sons from yesterday, and I reflect on that. When you open those files in your brain and you reflect on those moments and you feel it, what happens is your brain responds as though you relive the moment. So just thinking about remembering the good stuff, your brain is responding as though you're reliving it. Now, what's really cool is when you share that story. So you're sharing your joyful moment. As you reflect on it, you're now telling that story. Now what's happening is your listeners' brains, they're responding as they're tracking with you. They're responding as though their brain has also experienced that before. So we call them 4+ stories in our training, Christy, but basically these are brain friendly stories where it's authentically told. You're using your face, your voice, your body language to convey it. You're using an emotion word, feeling words. You're using body sensations. These kinds of stories are really one of the best things you could do to start some joy. So you're feeling it, you're remembering it, feeling it, and then you're sharing it. Shared meals are a great source of joy. So just having meals with friends, having coffee or tea with a friend, that's good. It's somebody that you enjoy. I encourage people to start making a list of some of their joy moments. Make a daily list, a weekly list, monthly list, just reflecting on maybe past moments of joy. Make that a daily practice. Add it to your prayer time. Add it to your drive to work. Like the end of the day, was something we do a lot as a family around a dinner table. We think about some of the joyful moments from our day, and just thinking it, feeling it, sharing it. It's a win-win, Christy. And it's so practical. It's so easy to do. But we get so much out of it when we do that. It really is a game changer.
That's so good. And it really is encouraging that we can train. I think of, I guess, like a grapevine, right? If you're growing a grapevine, you can direct where it grows. In the same way, we can direct our brain and what we focus on by training it to think on those joy-filled memories and sharing those joy-filled memories. So that's great. So we are going to, first of all, I want to just say thank you all for being with us. We have some friends from Arizona, Tacoma. We've got Jane from South Africa, Sarah from Chad. So yeah, so fun to see you guys from all around the world here joining us. We're going to get to some questions that you all are putting in, but I want to mention a couple next step resources for you really quick before we dive into those. We are following up this conversation we're having today on joy on Friday, March 19th. And Chris is going to be leading us in a 3-hour training. Well, it'll be more teaching. We're going to be talking more about the theory of what joy is, understanding it from a brain science perspective. We'll talk a little bit more about this issue of what role choice plays, because a lot of, us here, just choose joy. And so we're going to talk about, like he said, it's more of a reflex than just a choice. So we'll dive into that a little bit more, as well as talking about, actually, I'm going to grab my sheet here because I had it here. My brain lost track for a second. Oh yeah. We're going to talk a little bit more too about how joy can feel elusive, sometimes a little difficult to hold on to, a little difficult to spread and to cultivate and share. So we're going to talk about how we can overcome obstacles to spreading joy and how we can actually begin to build joy in our lives and our relationships. So this is going to be a fabulous event for going deeper on this. You can register at thrivetoday.org/found5joy/. And you're going to receive an email if you registered on Zoom. You're going to receive an email with these links tomorrow. The next thing I want to mention to you is, as we said, this is part of the Foundational 5 series. And if you want to learn more about the other resources we have, you can go to thrivetoday.org/foundational5/. And there's a link there to our webinar from last month. And it also shows kind of what's coming, and you can click on some of the links and be added to our email list to be alerted as our new Foundational 5 resources come out. So we would love for you to check that out. All right, so Chris, we have several questions that have come in. And the first one, this is the second one. Let me pull up to the first one. Can you describe, I love this question. Can you describe the difference between joy and rejoicing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can, joy is definitely part of the rejoicing process. So there's some overlap here, but joy specifically is this relational glad to be togetherness. We can see rejoicing as kind of the celebration of joy. I've heard some say, use this in a different way, but I would tweak this phrase and say rejoicing is joy dancing. So if you think about, I'm rejoicing, or maybe King David was rejoicing bringing the ark into Jerusalem. He was dancing. He wasn't rejoicing and dancing because he was mad. He was feeling a whole lot of glad to be together joy, right? So I would say rejoicing is just it's joy dancing in many ways. It's just celebrating the joy and being able to let that loose.
Awesome. I love that. So you were talking a little bit earlier, Chris, about babies and seeing mommy's face. One of the questions is, why do some babies and children look at a sincere smiling face, but don't feel joy and don't light up, but rather feel afraid?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that kind of veers into the realm of attachment styles, which is actually one of the skills we'll get to eventually in the sequence. But attachment styles are just these, basically it's an early life template of, how well joy was shared, how well needs were met. And sometimes with the secure type of bond, joy becomes a very easy thing. It's very natural. When bonds are insecure, then joy is no longer natural. That's usually when you get something like fear that's motivating or driving the brain more than joy. So the good news is God has wired us for joy. So if joy is not my natural go-to response, that's not permanent. Does it have to be? The literature would call like growing an earned secure attachment, which just means I can change those patterns. So no matter what's happened, I can actually change those patterns and I can grow joy. And I can basically, my brain learns to run on joy instead of fear. So that example, I would say it's probably veering a little bit into the insecure attachments, where there's more of a fear motivator response than joy.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. Does healing equal to being able, is it the same thing as being able to tell a painful story without feeling stuck or overwhelmed or in strong pain?
Well, I would probably adjust that a little bit to say one of the signs of healing is I can tell coherent narratives. So when I have maybe a lot of unprocessed, unresolved pain, one of the ways that shows up, besides maybe, impacting my joy levels, like, unprocessed pain, trauma pokes a hole in my joy balloon. So that can impact my joy levels. But a sign that your brain has resolved pain means that I can tell a coherent narrative about what's going on. So it shows how well is my brain working. At Thrive, we train solutions for 5 kinds of pain, which we don't have time to go into today. However, when things don't get processed through that sequence, then it's hard for my brain to be able to tell this coherent story. I end up getting disconnected. So in many ways, if I have processed trauma, I might not feel a whole lot of glad to be together joy when I think about that moment. However, what I would be looking for is joy's friend, peace. And peace would be, okay, I've got some peace here. Yeah, that was hard. That was scary, but now I have some peace. And joy might show up just like, I'm glad that I'm able to share this with you when I'm telling my story. Like it's meaningful. I'm glad that you're here while I share this with you. So that's where you might see joy pop up in something like that.
A helpful distinction. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
What is the difference between being thankful and grateful?
That's a great question. So I like to make this distinction. Like when gratitude is just, I'm thankful for tonight is pizza night, which is true. Friday night in the Coursey household is pizza night. So if you guys were here with us tonight, you'd be having some pizza. So that I'm grateful for pizza. Joy would be the relational part of that. So joy would be, I'm glad that we're having pizza. I'm thankful for pizza because it's good food. However, I'm going to be with my family. That's where the joy comes in. That's the relational piece. So I like pizza, but I like sharing pizza with my family, with my loved ones. So joy would be um, the relational aspect of things. Whereas like gratitude is I'm thankful the sun's shining. It's a sunny day today in Michigan. We've had a ton of snow the past month. The sun's shining and it's warm. Now I'm grateful. I'm thankful for that. I'm happy about that. But now when I think about taking a walk later, when my sons get home from school, taking a walk in the sunshine, that's the joy. So gratitude, and then there's relational joy, and they're good for each other. So you can't go wrong when you're trying to grow both of those.
Yeah. Here's a good question, Chris. How do you quickly respond to the comment, just choose joy, when it's a personal suggestion from somebody?
Yeah. That's a hard one because we talked last month about relational circuits. Sometimes if my relational circuit's on and you say to choose joy, I can give you the benefit of the doubt and just say, okay, they don't really understand joy. They mean well. Maybe they're just trying to help me. If my relational circuits are off and I'm not doing well and you just say, just choose joy, I'm going to feel minimized. So sometimes when people say choose joy, they mean try to focus on the good stuff, try to be optimistic about things, try to see a bigger picture. Joy is a relationship, so I can't just choose that. However, I could choose to do the things that will provide the opportunity of relationship. So most people, that's just what they've been taught. And in the book Joy Starts Here, my friends and I wrote that we go into a whole lot of detail on choose joy. But yeah, in many ways, unfortunately, people have good intentions when they say that, they're probably trying to help. But what's a better thing to help is to have people validate us in our pain and then attune with us. That's where now I feel like we're in this together. I feel understood. But if you just like, my car broke down, but Chris, choose joy, I'm not going to feel like you're understanding my situation here very well. I'm going to feel alone. And so, yeah, but that is a real dynamic. Usually well-intentioned people are trying. It's just not always helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Chris, does experience in utero impact how natural a response joy is in a baby?
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot that's happening there when babies in mommy's belly. Their sounds are very important. And so, one of the things that we did with my son, when I first learned about some of the science of what baby's doing and developing, I started to read when Jen was pregnant with our firstborn. I started to read to him. Now he was in my wife's belly, so it felt a little awkward at first reading to her belly, but there was a baby in there. So I would, interact. I would talk and talk about my day. I would just say, I can't wait to meet you. And I would read Psalms and all kinds of different things, just so baby would get used to the voice. And when my son was born after 47-hour labor, which was not easy, that's a story Jen can tell another day. But when he was born, they were taking my son to another part of the room after he was bonding with Jen. They had to go measure him and weigh him and all this thing. And he just started crying. Like he did not like being away from mommy. And just kind of intuitively, I just went over to help. Just as the nurse was trying to, comfort him and measure him and weigh him and all that stuff. And I just knelt down and just without even thinking about it, just started talking to him like, hey, buddy, it's okay. Daddy's here. The moment I started to talk, he stopped and he turned his head back where I was right there speaking to him. And the nurse was like, wait, what just happened? Like, what is this? I was like, I don't know. I was like, oh, wait a minute. He bonded with my voice. Now, obviously he would have bonded with Jen's voice so much more, so much better. But my voice was personal. It was familiar. So baby's bonding circuit was already at work. And he said, oh, wait a minute. I know that voice. And the Bible talks about something about knowing the Father's voice as well. So when I think about knowing that voice, it's part of this is familiar. My bonding circuit says, hey, wait a minute. That's personal to me. I know that voice, and it brings me comfort. So we now know there's a lot of things happening inside of mommy's belly. But one of the things would be the voice tone. Now, when newborns are born, hours old, they recognize their mother's smell. So a lot of studies on newborns, when they've tested just recognizing smells, which is part of that bonding circuit, they will recognize mommy's scent opposed to other mommy scents. They'll react when it's mommy's smell. So bonding is a powerful force in the human brain. So when we're thinking about joy, that's touching that's touching really the core of who we are. That's why joy is good when it's there, and it's very painful when it's not there. And that's really why we're encouraged, we want people to learn these relational skills, because I know if you learn joy, it becomes a habit in your life, and you're going to use it without even thinking about it. And that's spreading the good stuff in this world. And right now, our world could use some of the good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We can use more of it. And that kind of leads into this question. How can you find joy if you're going through a crisis like COVID, like an illness, an accident, divorce, or death of a dear one?
That's an excellent question. Part of what makes joy so good is I'm not alone, for someone's with me. So part of what makes pain bigger and louder and harder to deal with is when I feel alone in it. In fact, just feeling alone in pain creates the toughest conditions for my brain to process that. So here's the good news. Anything I can do that helps me feel connected, I'm talking about both with people as well as with the living God. Anything that I do that helps me feel seen or heard or understood, anything along those lines is actually going to be some of the best ingredients for my brain to navigate the hard stuff. So being a part of groups, being a part of small groups, any ways that you interact with other people, that's going to be really good, so that you, as far as your brain's concerned, you feel connected. Someone's with you, and someone who's glad to be with you. That ingredient right there makes all the difference between an inability to process hard stuff or being able to not only process the hard stuff, but even thrive coming out of it. So that would be the goal. You do whatever you can to feel connected with other people as well as with the living God. It's huge. In fact, one of the things that's interesting in the Bible, when God sent Moses to tell the Israelites in Egypt that he was going to deliver them, and Moses was proclaiming that good news, scripture says in Exodus that the people couldn't receive it. They couldn't hear it. They were short of breath. In other words, their brain there wasn't a whole lot of joy in that place. They felt alone. They felt disconnected. They kind of felt forgotten in their pain. And the message that God was bringing through Moses was like, look, I'm here, and we're going to walk out of this together. You're not alone. And that's kind of a message that all of us need. Like, we're not alone in the midst of the hard stuff. We do have a God who's glad to be with us, which is life-changing. But as people also need to be able to help one another feel connected and build some glad to be together joy.
We're going to take just two more questions, and thank you. I just want to thank you for putting your questions in. They all matter to us. We wish we had time to get to all of them. But this is a question. In the 60s, people didn't know about this stuff. Hearing someone talk about this way makes me feel sort of like, have I damaged my child? And I say this because my marriage at the time was in chaos. And I think she's giving this in reference to talking about your child in utero. But I know that Chris, even you've got your parenting book that's coming out. And as I've been collecting people's endorsements for it, a lot of people are like, I needed this book 20 years ago. Where was it? And that's a common thing when we learn these skills and we're like, oh, why didn't I get this? Or, oh, I wish I had given this to my kids. How would you respond to that?
That's a response of a loving parent. So only a loving parent would feel that way. So let's just acknowledge that. Like, if you feel that way, that says something really beautiful about you and who God made you to be. You are just the kind of person that would be bothered by that. And so, because you're loving. Now, here's the good news. God does not waste. This concept of redemption is beautiful as well. Like, God can actually bring some good in life out of the hard stuff. And so what you can do today as you hear this stuff is, one, share what you're learning. If it's with your children, share maybe some areas you messed up, but here's what you're learning. Even here's what you would have liked to have done differently. And if there's grandchildren involved, then, here's a chance now for that redemption to play out as you're now going to download something good and build joy. So I think for children, when there's pain with parents, just having a parent give a language for it and express some remorse over it, and says, I didn't do this right, but here's what I wish I would have known, because here's what I wanted to do. And the reality is we're all broken vessels. Like, we're all clay pots with cracks in it. The good news is, as we are becoming clearer on who God made us to be, we can share that. We can share that relationally. We can share that through stories. And I like to encourage parents, ask Jesus what he sees when he looks at that. So if you have pain and regret over maybe how you raise children or different things that's bothering you and robbing your peace, ask Jesus, what does he see when he looks at that? Because I have a feeling what he's going to tell you will probably be a comforting blanket that you can hold on to. So I would just, Lord, what do you want me to know about it? And when I've personally done that in my own life with my own family, like, the common response in my brain is, wow, God, there was some hard stuff back there, but I know you've used it so that I am where I am today because of what you've done with that junk. So how God can take it and redeem it and restore, and it's amazing. So those would be my thoughts. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you, Chris. That's really helpful. So our last question is, how much can joy have to do with physiological states that may not be optimal for every hour of the day? For example, since chemotherapy, I seem to have difficulty telling a coherent narrative.
Yeah, and that's totally understandable that would happen. Honestly, just that alone, when you interact with people, could be a helpful piece to just help them understand. The thing about joy is your brain will respond well to it. Even a chemo brain, which are really tough conditions when you're going through that. If you think about joy with the lens that you're not alone, for someone's with you, and having people who are glad to be with you while you go through that, is huge. And honestly, having people tell you some of their joy stories, even if you have a hard time telling a coherent narrative, it's even trying to think about it or trying to write it out is going to be good for your brain. And even having people tell you some joy stories would be really good. So any chance, where we can grow joy, see joy, hear joy, feel joy, all of that is going to be really good. And it does help us better navigate the hard stuff. And there's a lot of hard stuff in all of our lives.
Yeah, well, that's encouraging, Chris. And I, again, really wish we could get to all of your questions, but we so value you. We so value you taking the time to be with us, to join this conversation with us, to share your heart and to share your questions. And I really encourage you, especially as this is having questions pop up for you, to join us for our event on March 19th, because we are going to be digging deeper into this topic, and probably a lot of the things that you're questioning and wondering about, a lot of those will be answered as you continue just to dive into learning more about joy and learning to practice it more in your life. So we really would love to see you join us for that. We'll have the link come out in an email tomorrow. But again, you can go to thrivetoday.org/found5joy/ to register for that event. And we just want to thank you so much again for being with us. Chris, thank you so much for leading us in this conversation and for just sharing your insight and knowledge and expertise with us on this topic.
Well, thank you, Christy, and thank you for leading us today. You just did such a wonderful, joyful job with all of us here. And thank you, friends, as well. I'm so glad that you're a part of this, and go start some joy, and even Jesus, who is it today that might need some joy? And just, even reach out to someone, let them know you're thinking about them, highlight something you enjoy about them. Like, start the fun, start the good stuff today.
We hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you again for joining us. Bye-bye.
Take care.